Hey y'all, how's it going? Welcome back to Seed to Plate channel. My name is Brooke and today we're doing a little lunchtime spring garden maintenance. So I'm just gonna kind of take you through everything I'm doing and we'll go from there. I think we're really gonna focus on tomatoes and peppers. So let's get into it. Okay y'all, so I've been trying to spend a little less time on the social medias, but from what I have seen, people are talking a lot about topping peppers. So I want to talk to you a little bit about how I feel about that, how I approach it, because that is something I need to do. So first things first, let's talk about what topping peppers even means. Here's one of my pepper plants. This one actually has a label, which is amazing because a lot of my plants, especially my pepper plants, ended up without labels. This is an Aura yellow long pepper. This is a sweet pepper, and I have already picked the blossoms off of it. Now what you can see, or maybe you can't see from this angle, most peppers will typically grow in this Y pattern. So they have a main stem and then they grow in a Y. Now, when you quote unquote top a pepper plant, that means you actually take the top of this pepper plant off. Like you fully snip off the pepper plant. And that might seem a little counterintuitive, but let's talk about why you would do that. So the reason why you would do that is the same reason you would actually do this with basil. So let's go look at a basil plant that I topped yesterday. So here's a basil plant that you can see where I made the cut. I made the cut right there. Now what this does is it actually increases the surface area for these little leaves and you get a bigger canopy. And the more canopy you get, the more production you're gonna get. A lot of people will top all of their peppers. Let's talk about that for a second. So you have your big sweet peppers like your bells, and then you have your smaller peppers like your jalapenos, right? Just to give two examples. So you never want to top a bell pepper plant. Okay, so any of your big thick-walled peppers, you don't want to top those, or at least I don't, because it does limit your fruit production. Now, with those, you're gonna get smaller fruits, and so I don't ever touch my sweet pepper plants that are large. So in this example, this Aura long sweet pepper, I won't touch this one. However, your smaller peppers, whether it be jalapenos, serranos, habaneros, all of those are really good ones to top. And that's because the more surface area you get, it ends up growing a little bit more like a bush instead of like the traditional stem with the Y. So just to be safe, I don't even do what I call my mid-range peppers. So right here I have a Jimmy Nardello. It's a long red pepper. That's kind of a toss-up. The other factors that you're gonna wanna consider when you're talking about topping peppers is if you have a long enough growing season, because it is gonna stunt your peppers. You're literally cutting off the part that's like gonna produce flowers and fruit. So it is gonna stunt your peppers, but it's worth it if you have a long growing season. So here where I'm at in zone 8B in Central Texas, I have a very long growing season. So part of my problem this year is I did not label enough of my plants. So I don't know which ones are sweet peppers. I can kind of tell based on their growth patterns, but I don't wanna take any risks. So let me find one that I can confidently top. So this is one of my serrano peppers. So it's a little gangly, and the other thing with topping peppers is you never want to do it if the pepper is more than 6 to 8 inches tall. So this is definitely very much at the end of when I should be doing this. So what you want to do is you want to take your scissors or your pruners and you just want to trim under like maybe an inch and chop it off. It's like a little sad when you have to do it. And this year, because I don't have proper labels, I won't be doing it as much as I have in other years. However, it is beneficial if you have a long enough growing season. I had a bomb pepper year a couple years ago. I'll put up some pictures, and I did this to all of my small peppers and it just crushed it. Another factor that really makes a difference with peppers is how much water and rain you end up with. So they do take a lot of nutrition like a lot of other plants, but then also they just did really well when they got topped. Like none of these have labels. Now I will pick the first blossoms off of all peppers, whether they're hot or sweet or big or small, just because I want them to put a lot of emphasis on growth. Oh my God, I think none of these peppers have labels. That's funny. Okay, that's a poblano. We're not gonna touch that one. That's hilarious. Well, either way, at least now you know. Top your peppers, don't top your peppers. It's really up to you, but I do think it does provide more production. Next, let's talk about our tomatoes. So I grow a lot of tomatoes, and I grow two different kinds. We'll call them kinds. So I grow determinate tomatoes and indeterminate tomatoes. Now, probably a lot of you already know what that is, but just as a refresher, determinate tomatoes are a determined height, and they have a determined amount of fruit. That's why they're called determinate. They will stop growing after a certain amount of time. So all of these determinants that I have in my garden, they will all be done around mid-June. I will take all the tomatoes, put them in the freezer, and then can them accordingly. Now, my indeterminate tomatoes have an indeterminate height, okay? So I've had mine get up to like 9 feet tall before I finally am like, I can't do this anymore. Those are gonna be your heirloom tomatoes generally. So let's talk about what I'm gonna do with my determinate tomatoes first in regards to care, and then we'll move on to indeterminates. So first things first, let's talk about support. So these are some really great tomato cages that I got from Amazon years ago. They've done really well, they've stored really well, which for me was a necessity because I was apartment living. So all I'm doing with these is making sure that they have some kind of way to attach to this pole. And then what I'll be doing is I'll be putting T-posts into the ground, and then I will actually be doing a Florida weave to trellis these tomatoes. So really the biggest thing you need to do with tomatoes right now, determinate tomatoes, is make sure they're supported. There's those tomato cages from Amazon, but with the little bars. And so I've actually used those to cage all of these. And then these tomato cages are like your traditional tomato cages. And these were actually left here by the previous owner of this house. These determinate tomato plants won't get much taller than those trellises anyway, so who cares? However, those types of cages you don't want to use for indeterminate tomatoes, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But let's finish talking about the determinate tomatoes. Now, you may hear about pruning your tomato plants, and we'll talk about that when we get to our indeterminates. However, please don't trim. Please don't prune your determinate tomato plants. Pruning your tomato plants is really to increase air circulation, decrease disease, things like that. We'll talk more at length about that with the indeterminate tomatoes, which are over there. But please, 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 do not prune your determinate tomato plants. The only thing that that's going to do is decrease your fruit production. So you don't want to touch these because these have a determined set of fruit, they have a determined height, so the more you prune them, the less they're going to produce. Okay, so now that we've adjusted all of our clips, let's talk about indeterminate tomatoes. So a good way to know if your tomato is a determinate or an indeterminate is to either Google the variety if you buy a transplant and it doesn't say, or look at your seed packet. So let's talk about support for our indeterminates. So you'll notice I have this fencing up. Let me give you a wider view here. So we have tomatoes on each side, and then we have this fencing. The plan will be, as the tomatoes grow up, 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 we will actually be tying them to this fencing on either side. This fencing is a little bit flexible so that it goes with the wind, and that's our plan for our indeterminate tomatoes. Now, normally my indeterminate tomatoes are much larger than this at this point, but I got them started a little bit late, so what are you gonna do? All right. Now, what I'm about to tell you about indeterminate tomatoes can be a little controversial, so just stick with me. So here's a pretty good example of a really well-growing indeterminate tomato plant. Now, there's a couple things you want to look for. I usually prune mine for about 6 to 12 inches. So that means that I want the first 6 inches of this plant to be totally bare, and that's going to help with air circulation. So I will actually continue to trim off. This one feels a little aggressive. I want it to get a little taller and a little stronger, but it will actually really help your tomatoes be disease-free. So for example, something like this that only has a couple of leaves, I want this to have at least 3 or 4 leaves before I go start cutting them off the bottom. Now, the other thing to watch out for at this stage are what are called suckers. So when you see a little branch growing in the armpit, these are suckers, and you want to pluck these off. So actually, this one we'll lose these and these. Anyways, when you see suckers on a determinate tomato plant, we don't touch them. When we see suckers on an indeterminate tomato plant, we pluck them off. Because you want your indeterminate tomato plant, I prune them down to 1 or 2 stems. So that's when you hear about tomato pruning, that's what they're talking about, is your indeterminate tomato plants. You're really just shorting yourself if you choose to prune your determinate tomato plants. So these tomatoes will get a structure similar to a pole that will be leaning, and then once we're able to, we will start tying them to here, and they will grow and grow and grow and grow until they can grow no more. And a lot of people will actually continue to take care of them, and then they will kind of generate in the fall, which is something I may play around with. Now, this may sound a little silly to say, but the other thing to check for during this time of the year is if you have to water your plants. With a lot of spring rain, a lot of people are like, when do I know when to water my plants? Y'all, I'm gonna make this real easy for you. I'm gonna make this real easy. The only thing you need to do when you're wanting to know if you need to water your plants is dig in the dirt. If you don't feel any moisture 6 inches down in the dirt, you need to water your plants. If you do feel moisture, don't worry about it, because you have to remember you're watering the roots of the plant, you're not watering the tops of the plant. Okay, y'all, so the last thing that I have to do today is direct sow some stuff. So a couple videos back, I started all my cucumbers and melons while I was telling my engagement story. That was a poor choice because I didn't label anything, and I assumed I was going to remember where things were. Do you think that happened? No, it did not. So we have the arch trellis. We actually have a massive arch trellis. It's gonna be like a tunnel. And on one side of the trellis, it's super tall. It's like 8 feet tall. So on one side of the trellis, I'm gonna do small melons. So that'll be our Kajari melons. That will be our pocket melons. So cute. And then I'm going to do a royal golden melon. And then a sugar baby. So I'm gonna have 4 melon vines that will be climbing up this trellis. Now, the other thing that's gonna be in this bed, and there's a really big spot for it for a reason, is this yellow flesh moon and stars watermelon. Now, if you're a frequent viewer of this channel and you're about to tell me, why are you planting watermelons because you don't like watermelons? I just keep that to yourself for right now, okay? I'm trying to evolve as a human. So, and then I'll be doing a cantaloupe style melon. I'm gonna do that actually in the middle of my tomato bed as kind of like running down the middle. So that's what's on deck for melons. Now, when I direct sow melons, when I direct sow anything, I put at least 2 to 3 seeds in the ground. I will move away my mulch, and actually I can get pretty close to this oregano because it'll kind of vine out. I'll move away my mulch and kind of keep it away until the seed germinates. And then you really don't need to dig too far down. So I'm just gonna loosen up the dirt a little bit, and then we'll start with these sugar babies. I've done this before. All you need to do is give them little hammocks once they start growing. They're really cute. It was actually super fun, and honestly, even if I don't like watermelon, my dogs love watermelon, and watching a dog eat watermelon is just so freaking cute. So I just put my seeds in. I'm going to lightly cover them up, and then because I'm growing these melons vertically, I'm actually only going to give them a foot, which is 1 hori knife of space. And the reason for that is they're growing up, they're not growing out on the ground. So I'm only going to give them a foot, and they will be totally fine with that. Now, what we're going to do on the other side are cucumbers. So I will be doing cucumbers, again, about a foot apart, and the varieties that we'll be doing, which again, I kind of already went over this, but that was when I messed up. So silver slicer, these do really well in the heat. Lemon cucumbers, these are super cute. Armenian white cucumbers, which are actually melons, and then a couple of these just standard cucumber varieties. So we'll do the same thing, really, really shallow, and I probably will go ahead and shoot it with some water, even though I don't think it's super necessary. We just had like 3.5 inches of rain, and we're supposed to get rain at some point this week, but we'll go ahead and do it anyway. Changing strategy for this big long tomato bed. and I'm gonna do the thing that I'm probably gonna regret, but I am going to plant squash. Now, if you're not from anywhere that's affected by squash vine borer, let me educate you. Squash vine borer is this silly little thing that will come lay eggs on your squash plants, and then the larva will eat the squash from the inside out. Now, I had squash vine borers bad at my last house. We had them at the community garden. However, there's a chance that at this new place they have not yet found the space. So I'm going to attempt butternut squash. I'm going to put that guy in the middle, and then I'm going to attempt some yellow squash and some gray squash on the ends. Probably going to regret this, but my other thought is this bed is like covered in marigolds, and squash vine borers do get a little confused with different scents and different colors because they're looking for those big fat yellow blossoms. So I'm gonna go for it and see what happens, and my confidence is low. But man, I love zucchini and I love squash. It's one of my favorite things to eat, so if we can make this work, I'd be very excited. One more batch of things after this that we're going to be direct sowing, so hang in with me because y'all are going to like it. Okay, y'all, and last but certainly not least is it's time to direct sow my flowers. So we have sunflowers and zinnias. I always tend to direct sow these because we have a long season and it's just easy to do that here. So here's the problem, is I didn't really account for space like in my garden plans. So we're about to do a little chaos gardening together. Now with sunflowers, I say this every year, so here's your reminder: do not plant your sunflowers near your tomatoes or other things that are juicy, because these stupid stink bugs will decide that they're theirs, and they're not. So I'm actually thinking I might do my sunflowers back here and just like have a little like corner of sunflowers, and then I think I'm just gonna like plant my zinnias somewhere. I don't yet know where. And also from my original garden plans, I don't have my big native perennial beds yet, so that's something I'm trying to still kind of think about as the space evolves. So in terms of sunflowers that I think I'm honestly might just kind of scratch up the ground a little bit and just like sprinkle some seed and see what happens. We have our Mexican torch sunflowers. These are some of my faves. These seeds are really old, so I'm not sure if they're gonna grow, but these are Russian mammoth sunflowers. We have just your standard sunflower. We have Autumn Beauty sunflowers. And then this one, which I told myself I was going to be a little bit more careful and plant these with like a lot of intention because I desperately want these peach sunflowers, but this is a Florist Sunny Bouquet mix. So I think that's my plan. And now I have to kind of rush a little bit because we're supposed to have rain very soon. And I really want to take advantage of the rain if I can. So those are the sunflowers I'm going to plant. In terms of other flowers, I do want to get some echinacea in the ground. I have some nasturtiums. These I'm really excited. I'm going to stick these in the corners of some of the beds. These are trailing nasturtiums. And then I have just a bunch of different kinds of zinnias. So I'm going to go do a little guerrilla gardening, chaos gardening real quick. And those are all of the spring tasks. So it was a little vloggy. Thanks so much for joining me. Happy gardening, and we will see you next time.